scholars to Teahouse Chats, your dive into the dynamic world of scholarly publishing, hosted by the Scholarly Publishing Teahouse of LaGuardia Community College Library. I'm Liz Jardine, and I'm joined by my fellow tea-loving librarians, Thomas Cleary and Ann Matsucci, here to share insights and spark conversations on everything from open access to peer review, all served with a side of fun. Whether you're charting your first publication or navigating the seas of digital scholarship, our tea house is open to all. Ready to see what's brewing? Let's get started. So welcome, listeners. We're back after summer break, and I hope you had a productive summer break as well. Maybe you got some scholarship done, and if you are, you're thinking about publishing it. Well, our podcast is here to support you. We've got our first special guest, and to introduce our guest and get us started, I'll turn it over to Anne.
We are so grateful to have a longtime friend and truly one of the smartest and coolest people I know on the planet. Jill Cirasella is here with us today. Jill Cirasella is an associate professor, scholarly communication librarian, and university liaison at CUNY's Graduate Center. She leads the Mina Rees Library scholarly communication initiatives and works with campus colleagues to advance scholarship for the public good. Her research projects include anxieties surrounding open access, attitudes about practice-based library literature, and the lived experience of hard-of-hearing librarians. Jill has also worked for 3 years as the chair of the editorial board of the Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication, and is also the co-founder and managing editor of the Journal of Graduate Librarianship. Jill's educational background is in the fields of computer science, library and information science, logic, and quantum computing. Thank you so much for joining us here today, Jill. And I think we were thinking about opening with a general question about your work. You know, what does it mean to be a university liaison?
That's a really good question. And I think the answer is that I am still just figuring it out as well. So what we tried to capture in my new title, and so I'm sure you're all aware that, right, we all have like our ranks, right? Assistant professor, associate professor, full professor. And then in the libraries, we also have our functional title. And my functional title has changed a little bit over the years as there's been some, arrivals, departures, restructurings in the library. And with my current title, which is new to me, we were trying to capture the fact that now, in addition to having my job at the Graduate Center as the scholarly communication librarian, there is a way in which, even though I am still employed by the Graduate Center, based at the Graduate Center, and primarily working with the Graduate Center community, my job now officially includes some duties related to the larger university community in terms of education and outreach and consultations on topics related to scholarly publishing and scholarly communication more broadly. Yes, I could tell you more about the history of why we decided to structure it that way, but that pretty much summarizes what the title means.
Can you tell us some more about the outreach and the workshops that you're doing, and maybe with an eye toward what might be of particular interest or importance to community college scholars?
Yes. With respect to workshops, it's always been the case that I've taught a handful of workshops for the Graduate Center community, but now those workshops are open to the full CUNY community of researchers, whether those are faculty members, staff members, administrators, graduate students, or even undergraduate students. Anyone who is affiliated with CUNY is welcome to come to any of the workshops that interest them. And I think that whether at a community college or a 4-year college, or even somebody who's still a graduate student, we cover some topics that could be very helpful for folks who are sort of earlier in their publishing careers. And so both things that are good for them to understand, like what they're agreeing to when they sign a contract with a journal publisher, and what what is true and no longer true once they sign that contract or perhaps click the button to accept the contract. There's not a whole lot of actual signing that happens anymore. And then also for folks who are maybe right in their first year or first couple of years in a scholarly role, some things to be wary of, such as the initially seemingly inviting and appealing invitations to publish with certain journals, but then realizing that actually something is very fishy with these invitations. And so helping scholars understand that that's not how legitimate journals most of the time end up recruiting content for the journals. That, sometimes there are calls for papers, but typically it's a submission and review process rather than fawning, flowery invitations, or even sometimes kind of arm twisting invitations to submit to them. Sometimes that arm twisting can get quite pronounced. Emails that say, we're in desperate need of an additional article for our next issue. Can we count on you? If a full article is too much, can we count on you for a 2-page article? Can you submit a 2-page article by the end of the week? And even sometimes emails that will try to fool you by confusing you and pretending to be a follow-up message on a previous message when there was no previous message. It's very, very sneaky. All right, people are busy. People send lots of emails. They may not always remember that, in fact, no, they didn't correspond with this journal about submitting an article. If the journal comes to them and says, like, following up us on our previous exchange, we're hoping you'll submit an article by such and such date. Yeah, the emails that say that, right? Not standard practice, not something to take at face value.
How have conversations with faculty that received those emails gone? Yeah.
I think a lot of people who are a bit farther along in their career, right, and they've just developed a sense of how things tend to work. They can sniff them a mile away. But for graduate students and newer faculty, they sometimes just don't quite know what to make of it. It's not necessarily that they're sucked in by it, but something seems off, but they can't quite tell what, and they need help figuring out how to evaluate it. And so that's often what I talk about, is we don't have to go through and check every characteristic or every quality marker of a journal. If we see a few things that are off, that's usually enough for us to know. Moving on. And then I've also, so I feel newer scholars can often tell that something's a little off. More experienced scholars often, really understand what the deal is. But then at the farther end of the spectrum, the more senior scholars who are extremely busy and in fact are more accustomed to receiving emails that are flattering and inviting them to do things. It's I have heard from some senior scholars who have been fooled by those emails because they're not so different from emails that are legitimately complimenting their work and inviting them to do something. And I even had some senior scholars and even a former president of the Graduate Center admit to me that not really taking a close look at the email, they had forwarded it on to advisees or students, thinking, oh, this isn't for me, but maybe it's an opportunity for you. And then that can be quite perilous, because getting a recommendation from a faculty member, well, that's typically a sign to a student that, yeah, this is something to pursue. And so I think, faculty need to not just be aware of what opportunities they seize or don't seize, but what opportunities they highlight or promote or pass on to students.
What are some of the particular workshops you've got on offer this fall semester, or this year if you've planned the whole academic year out?
So I'm starting off with a workshop about these scammy journals, often referred to as predatory journals, and then a workshop about open access, where we look at open access from both sides, both in terms of a researcher looking for research and seeking to read research, and as a scholar seeking to disseminate research. So it's about some good practices and things to know about finding other people's research and also publicly sharing your own. And then a little bit later this semester, there's one that's all about impact factor, officially called journal impact factor, and other citation-based numerical metrics, where these numerical metrics that are calculated based on the number of citations that an article gets, an author gets, or a journal gets. And so we look at them and we look at how they're calculated, and then we talk about some of the problems, some of the ways in which they actually offer a very limited or blinkered or biased view of impact. And then something that's not on the calendar yet, but I hope to be able to spin up either by the end of the semester or maybe for January, is a workshop that would be all about, and this would be for newer scholars, all about the journal publication process from submission through the editorial and peer review and production process to publication. I think a lot of that seems to be kind of behind a curtain. And so I would like to create a workshop that demystifies it. And of course, different journals function differently. You know, some journals are quite small and you're working with one editor the whole time. Some journals are really quite large and there's whole hierarchies of editors-in-chief, associate editors, assistant editors, etc. So it's not the case the same rules apply everywhere, but I think I can still help, both from my experiences as a scholar and my experiences as a scholarly communication librarian and on the editorial board of the Journal of Librarianship and Scholarly Communication, and now as managing editor of the Journal of Graduate Librarianship, give a glimpse into the types of things that tend to happen behind that curtain. And then, are you ready for me to keep going?
You bet.
Okay. And then next semester, I have a cluster of workshops that are more about contracts and copyright. So in some ways, the more technical side of scholarly publishing. So a workshop, right, about journal article contracts, which are typically not negotiable, what you have to sign and what you're agreeing to when you sign it. And then book publication contracts, which are typically very negotiable. Right, journal publishers, they publish so many articles, they often publish so many journals that they don't really have the ability to individually negotiate those article contracts. But with book publishers, it's very different, and they do tend to individually negotiate various terms of each contract. And so I have a workshop looking at the common terms in common clauses in book publication contracts, and how to approach a conversation with a publisher about clarifications and negotiations. And I should say that workshop is with materials created by the Authors Alliance, which is a really wonderful organization that is really dedicated to creating educational materials and guidance for authors who, as they put it, write in order to be read. And so I deliver the workshop, but I want to make clear that those materials and pretty much everything I know about book publication contracts comes from the Authors Alliance, which, it is important to note, is not the same as the Authors Guild, which opinions may differ. But since we're in the tea house, I will spill a little tea and say that from my standpoint, it seems that the Authors Guild is very often protecting the interests of publishers over authors. So it's important to know that distinction between the Authors Guild and the Authors Alliance. So those two workshops about contracts, and then a workshop about copyright and fair use for scholarly authors. And so there's all sorts of different realms we could talk about copyright and fair use regarding what libraries do, regarding educational materials in the classroom, regarding all sorts of things. But in this workshop, because everything I do with respect to outreach and education has to do with scholarly publishing, it's about copyright and fair use as it pertains to scholarly publishing. And then I think if I could, I would have it all in the same workshop, but it doesn't all fit into an hour. So an additional workshop all about Creative Commons licenses. And again, sort of like the workshop about open access, I try to make that contain both information about what you as a user of other materials might encounter and what those Creative Commons licenses mean for your use of the materials, and then for you as a creator of scholarly materials, when you might have the ability to use Creative Commons licenses and how to choose among the different Creative Commons licenses. So phew, that is the lineup of workshops. And I will say, when I did these just for the Graduate Center, I would get 10 people, 5 people coming to a workshop. Right now, the RSVP lists are more like 50 people, 60 people. So it's really thrilling to be able to speak to that much of the CUNY community, because I do think that these are topics that there's a lot of interest about university-wide.
Absolutely. That sounds like a great lineup. And I need to start RSVPing myself, because there's always something new to learn. And even here at LaGuardia, we've had several authors coming out with books recently, and we get questions about books, which is something that I personally haven't had any part in. So always good to learn more about that. Is there a website that lists all your workshops that I can put in our show notes?
Let's see. It's a really good question. Well, we have the Graduate Center Library's events calendar, but we can filter that to get just to these workshops. So let me filter it and send you that link. 1 second.
Great. I will pop that in our show notes and RSVP myself.
Yes, please do. And also, wait, I have mostly been teaching each workshop just once. I'm kind of wondering, if I should maybe get in the habit of offering each one twice, maybe once during the daytime and once in the evening, trying to respect different people's schedules. But I do always encourage people who are interested to RSVP, even if they can't attend, because I send the recording to anyone who RSVPs. But I do know that, right, watching a recording, if in fact you ever do it, I have to admit, I receive emails with links to recordings of webinars all the time, and I never watch them. But even if I do watch them, right, watching them recorded is somehow not the same as watching it live. So I am toying with that idea of creating an evening offering for each workshop too. But yeah, I feel it's kind of like watching Saturday Night Live. You feel like you're experiencing something if you watch it live, and you feel like you can barely pay attention if you're watching it recorded.
Well, maybe putting a plug in for the community college point of view, with the teaching load that our faculty have, I think, an additional offering might be useful for them.
Okay, that's really helpful to know.
Yeah, or you can try it, like maybe you could do like an evening series the next season, like fall and spring or something,
Yes.
Keep the burden a little bit less for the time that it takes for you to. But I'm sure they're all very grateful about, having these opportunities. So thank you for doing this work.
And I marvel at people who can watch the videos after the fact. They must have better attention spans than I do.
Anne, did you have a question about some of the recent happenings in the scholarly communication space?
Oh, I think if we had more time, I think we could have a whole conversation talking about like things like, the future of the Internet Archive and CDL.
Yeah,
I know we don't have enough time to go way into it, but any thoughts that just rise to the surface at the moment?
I will just say, right, that it is incredible. I don't think, when I was a new librarian, I don't think it was on my bingo card that the things I talk to researchers about would include like active and controversial court cases about copyright, fair use, and various things having to do with publishing. It really is interesting the extent to which things can change by new lawsuits and new court rulings.
Well, we're coming up on our allotted time, and we certainly appreciate your coming to speak with us, Jill. You're one of my favorite people in scholarly communications, not just here at CUNY, but in the whole world of scholarly communications. You're just always so generous with your time and so knowledgeable and just so open to learning all these new things. Like you said, you didn't imagine that you'd have to be talking about court cases and things like that. And yet you're out there and you're picking it up and helping the rest of us to learn about these.
Well, thank you. And I also want to say I am so impressed with the scholarly tea house or scholarly publishing tea house suite of activities that you have. I think it's so great that there are, several of you who have the energy for these topics to talk amongst yourselves, bring the conversation to faculty. I'm really inspired by it. I wish I had come up with the term scholarly publishing tea house. It's so warm and cozy.
And we encourage our LaGuardia faculty, administrators, staff, whoever's trying to publish, if they have questions, to reach out to us. There's always interesting things going on, and we'll do our best to help you out. And if we didn't know the answer, we certainly know people who we can ask, like maybe Jill, who can point us in the right direction.
Happily.
So as we reach the end of today's Teahouse Chat, we'd like to thank our listeners for joining us as we spoke with Jill Cirasella from the Grad Center about services she's offering to the wider CUNY community around scholarly communication. We hope you found fresh ideas and inspiration for your own scholarly publishing journey. Let us hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future topics with us. Your insights make our tea house richer. You can connect with us via our website or email. The addresses are in the show notes. Let's keep the conversation brewing, and don't forget to subscribe for your monthly sip of scholarly success. Until next time, keep the kettle warm and your ideas flowing.